Good morning, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar on the top 5 SOX concerns for Dynamics AX. I'm Dee Bowers, and I'll be your moderator. So before we begin, I just want to go over the webinar software. Let me go ahead and get started here. Looks like we're a little bit out of sort here, but please take a moment and check your audio settings just to make sure that you have the right one selected. So if you're calling in on a telephone, please make sure you have the telephone option selected. And if you're using your computer, please select the mic and speakers option. Oh, I think we're having a little bit of trouble with the slides here, so just 1 second, please. Okay, well, it looks like one of our slides has disappeared, but I'd just like to go over a few other items. So you should also see an orange arrow on the right side of your monitor. If you click that arrow, you'll be able to toggle the webinar pane between the open and closed position. And then you should also see a chat window. Please feel free to enter your questions throughout the webinar, and then we'll address those at the end of the presentation during our Q&A session. And finally, webinar participants will receive an email within 48 hours with a link to the recorded webinar and slide deck. So you should get that in your email. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and jump into our presenters. First, we have Jeremy Suharski, Director of our Governance, Risk, and Compliance Practice at Armanino. I'm also pleased to present Tim Horrigan, our ERP Consulting Partner at Armanino. So it's great to have you guys both here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Jeremy.
Excellent. Thanks, Dee, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us here. And I think we've got some good content pulled together for you guys. There's a lot of things that are happening in sort of what would appear to be two disparate markets around risk and compliance, specifically for public companies needing to be compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley, as well as what's happening with sort of the evolution of ERP. So we wanted to begin by talking about some of the trends related to each of these areas. We're going to discuss how these trends, both independent of each other as well as in combination, can create some significant challenges for organizations. And from there, what we've done is distill down sort of the top 5 challenges that you're likely to experience as an organization using Dynamics AX that may be public, and what you can do to help overcome some of those challenges. So with that, let's start off with some of the challenges and current trends that we're seeing around Sarbanes-Oxley. So we're hitting the 10-year mark here, 10-year anniversary of Sarbanes-Oxley. Hard to believe that the 10 years has gone by that quick, but what we've seen, especially over the last couple of years, is over the last 12 to 18 months, has really been a significant shift in how external audit firms, especially the Big Four, are approaching audits of internal controls, and that's really being driven by a lot of pressure from the PCAOB, which is the government agencies that oversees public accounting firms. So if you look at it, back in 2004, 2005, we had AS2, which was a very bottom-up audit standard. We then adopted AS5, really shifted it to be a more practical top-down approach. From there, we had additional audit standards that continued to be introduced around auditable evidence, around materiality calculations, around risk assessment. One of the most significant changes and trends that really came about in April of 2012 was the passing of the Jobs Act. And if you recall, this is an act passed by Congress, signed into law by President Obama, that was intended to lower the barriers for companies going out and getting public capital. A lot of organizations have taken advantage of various aspects of the law to allow them to register confidentially, have a longer runway for certain components of Sarbanes-Oxley, etc. The other major trend that we're seeing here that we'll be doing a webinar about in early 2014 is the major change to the COSO internal control framework. COSO is the most widely adopted internal controls framework. It was introduced in 1992, and it's not really undergone a major revision since. Over the past 24 months, the revisions were evaluated and ultimately passed by the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. That's what COSO stands for, and will be in place for all organizations using the standard going into 2014. And last but not least, I did want to kind of highlight some of the changes that we're seeing from a SOX perspective brought about by the PCAOB. Their inspection results are published to the public, and that is for every organization, every public accounting firm that they evaluate. And if you read those, you'll see that there's some significant themes that carry throughout, not only the Big Four, but both regional and national firms. First and foremost, a very significant focus on completeness and accuracy. And this is looking at how reports are used and queries are used and spreadsheets are used in the performance of internal controls, and validating that those have the proper completeness and accuracy to the point of having to tie them all the way back to data elements in your database, whether it be Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, etc. The other theme that we're seeing in a significant way is what's called level of precision, meaning in the past it's been acceptable to say that management conducts a review of a specific process or a specific line item, maybe on the balance sheet or the P&L. However, organizations are now being required to define the level of precision at which they do those reviews. For example, we look for all outliers beyond $10,000 or beyond X percent. And that's getting a lot of scrutiny by the external audit firms, because they're getting pressure to say, if you do not know what that explicit threshold is, how do you know that that control operated in the appropriate manner? So you can see it's really creating kind of a significant shift in the way that internal controls are being evaluated. And last but not least, management review controls. That ties directly into level of precision. Is what is management doing to ensure that not only a review is being performed, but what are the qualitative and quantitative components of that review? And really what it comes down to is it's really created a pretty significant shift over the last 12 months in how control environments are being evaluated, where if you look back at what we did in 2003 to probably 2006 as SOX was first starting to be introduced and then mature, we really looked at, did we have the right sort of horizontal scope, if you will? Did we miss any processes? Did we miss any key controls? That part is pretty well under control. Now it's more of a vertical approach. Do we have the right level of detail in our existing control set to say that we have the appropriate controls over financial reporting? And the bottom line, you're probably saying, that's a lot of really good audit background, Jeremy. What does this really mean to me and my organization? The bottom line is you have to be adaptable. And what worked in prior years, what worked 2, 3, 4 years ago, may not be the same way that you need to approach Sarbanes-Oxley going forward. And as we look at some of these concerns around completeness, accuracy, level of precision, etc., I'm challenging a lot of my organizations that I work with, a lot of my clients, to take a look and see where they can tap into the power of their ERP to get away from manual controls and leverage some of the power that your ERP may have available. So with that, let's shift briefly to Tim to talk about what are some of the current trends in business software and what are we seeing in the ERP markets.
Thanks, Jeremy. I like your picture up there, though. So some of the things, and I'm happy to be here as well. Welcome, everybody. So a little bit more about the business trends that we're seeing. I lead part of our Dynamics AX implementation team. So I'm sitting across from auditors. I like to work side by side with Jeremy when I can, but oftentimes when I'm not, I'm listening to what they have to say. And I think a lot of the things that they're emphasizing as of late is definitely aligned with what Jeremy was just speaking about. So those include security, much more focus in recent months and years here on the security model, and not just saying, do you have one, but really peeling the onion and going deep on that and asking a lot of detailed questions around it. Reporting, very interested on the ability of Dynamics AX, in this case, to be able to track what has changed in the system. We know that it's a commercial off-the-shelf product, but once it's configured, what modifications have been made, and can you provide evidence of exactly what was changed and when and who did it? The whole idea around pre-integrated solutions is AX, much like other ERPs out there, very much an end-to-end solution. So just this idea from a controls perspective of connecting what might have been different departments previously or different point solutions, now all pre-integrated into AX in this case. That idea of how that data flows and what's visible by different users is very powerful and needs to be controlled. So that's definitely an area that they've been focusing on. The whole idea of internal controls themselves, be it automated, be it manual, as it relates to the software and then in the context of the entire company, definitely another key point that they're asking us a lot about, not just the software itself, but the context of how it's going to be operated. And then the software itself, again, as time goes on, it keeps getting more and more mature, so there's more options, more functions, and that's both wonderful in that it can support all kinds of different requirements for different industries, but it's also so powerful that it also creates some challenges in that when everything is very configurable, it's a chore to be able to control that process and then to demonstrate to others that you have that configuration process under control. And then lastly, just again, sitting down with the auditors, we like to try to meet with them up front, understand what their focus areas are, but for sure they are just much more interested in seeing the documentation. We'll talk more about that in a few moments about what is needed as part of any given implementation.
No, that's great, Tim. And at the end of the day, what does that really create for us? And you look at kind of how these different facets, different areas converge. You look at the increasing complexity and, to Tim's point, configurability of these systems. There's not only one way to approach a business challenge within the ERP environment now. You look at increased regulator scrutiny and the changes that external audit firms are adapting in their methodology and how they approach Sarbanes-Oxley. And then you also fold in a lack of direct expertise with AX. We're going to touch on this as we go through the discussion today. We're talking about Oracle or SAP. Those are two products that have been around and been in the market for decades, so there's a lot of institutional knowledge. AX is not known from an audit perspective quite as well. You look at those different things, and really what does it do? It creates some significant concerns and challenges for organizations that are on AX. To that point, though, those challenges are by no means insurmountable. So let's talk about kind of what are the top 5 areas that we would look at as the concerns related to SOX for organizations leveraging AX. We'll step through these individually, but at a high level, first one is go live is a big deal. And this is not only when you go live for the first time on AX, but also as you're doing upgrades and as you're doing integrations that may have a financial impact. Implementing old processes and new systems, this is something that we see very, very common with organizations where they will get a new technology such as AX, yet they will implement the old legacy process without really taking a hard look at how process changes could benefit them even more. As I mentioned, third item here, auditors don't speak AX. I mentioned SAP and Oracle. Very, very mature products have been in the market for a very long time. AX is relatively new in this space. And because of that, auditors don't have that ingrained deep knowledge of it. There's a lot of native tools within AX that are very good to support audit activities, but they may not get you all the way there, or they may not allow you to optimize and streamline your internal control environment at the same level that you could with some third-party tools. So we'll touch on that briefly. And then really the last concern we wanted to highlight, this really cuts across all organizations regardless of your ERP. And it's really being a C student is not good enough. And we'll dig into this deeper, but the sort of headline here is I've seen too many organizations come into a SOX implementation and say, we just want to pass. Getting a C grade, if you will, on our controls is good enough. Well, that doesn't really give you many options to fall back on if, in fact, you have issues with your primary controls. So we'll dig into that a little bit more and discuss what those look like and give some tips on how we avoid falling into that trap. So the first one, let's talk about the go live is a big deal. And again, what we want to highlight here is it's not only a go live for your initial implementation, the same principles are going to apply to any type of upgrade or integration. And with that, let's kind of start off with talking about how we march towards go live and what that process commonly looks like.
Yep, thanks, Jeremy. So SOX compliant or not, to have a successful go live for any new software implementation, you're going to need a comprehensive and well-defined methodology, right? There are several out there to choose from. Today we're going to highlight the Armanino approach, which is a typical waterfall. We have 5 phases and 4 integrated work streams that you see outlined here. And even though there are several methodologies out there and the names of individual phases may change slightly, they're all very, very similar. So let's drill down on the next slide about what are the activities that are happening in each of those phases typically. So using the Armanino methodology as context here, in the plan and analyze phase, this is where we really want to encourage the engagement of knowledgeable subject matter experts who understand the principles of internal controls to participate in the design of business processes and defining the requirements for the application, which traditionally we think of more as just functional requirements, but what we're here today to highlight is we also want to have people in the room that really look at it from that internal controls lens. So we're also looking at what are the automated controls that an AX, in this case, can automate. And there's a lot, so that's the good news. But it still takes a special point of view to really think it through about how you're going to be using the system. And so that's important to engage folks like Jeremy's team in that plan and analyze phase. In the design and configure phase, or the development phase, in this space, we're doing the actual configuration of the relevant automated controls, the security model. And here we actually have a choice, I think. We'll get into this more a little bit later as well. But we are building business process design, business process flows as part of any ERP implementation. But as context, oftentimes we could optionally be creating high-level standard operating procedures, or just talk about more documentation. And so finding the right balance of what you're looking for at this point in time in the project is a scope and approach item that needs to be agreed upon up front. But here in this project, this is the area where we would be configuring the system and then documenting the design. The test and train phase is really that formal user acceptance testing phase where you'd be looking at all the automated controls, you'd be looking at the security model itself, and doing some, mostly from a functional perspective, the user acceptance testing itself. The deployment phase is where you actually do that production data conversion, do the final documentation, collect all the wonderful software development lifecycle objective evidence, which we'll talk about in a second, to make sure we have that all packaged up just from an IT governance perspective. And then lastly, support. This is where, of course, we're post-go live, so we're trying to stabilize the AX implementation itself. And once it is stable, this is where that choice is. This is where typically the bulk of the SOX documentation work happens, refinement of those business processes, the key point being you need a stable environment to do that efficiently. The option, as I mentioned earlier, was you can do it in parallel during that design and configure phase, but it is a bit of a chicken and an egg. I think where we typically end up is we'd like the involvement of an architect who understands internal controls and can provide some level of guidance during the initial implementation. And then given the expertise and experience that Armanino has, we can often get most all of the internal controls, or automated controls rather, configured well. But it's really not until that support phase where you really have that different point of view coming in, really looking and scrutinizing how the system's going to get used, and then hopefully then just doing tweaks to the actual configuration rather than any wholesale adjustments. But again, there's a lot to do on any given ERP implementation, so we're trying to find the best way to balance the different tasks and sequence them. And more often than not, it's typically implement the software with good knowledge of what needs to be done, and then in that support phase, really focusing on that internal controls activities in earnest, refine those, and then go on over time to do the recurring testing and whatnot that Jeremy's group does, where the actual ERP implementation per se has already gone live, and so that's kind of where we would wrap from our perspective. Okay, and on this next slide, here's the list of documentation that most auditors are going to want from you. So we can touch on that. So what I like to recommend to folks is early on in that plan and analyze phase to invite your auditor to a meeting. Theoretically, they all should be looking for the same sorts of things, but every auditor and every relationship is a little bit different. So it's good to get in front of them and understand, where are their focus areas, where are their hot buttons. But generally speaking, they all come back to these same bullets here, where on the project management side, they definitely want to see evidence of the client's involvement, management's involvement in the project. They really discourage that somebody goes and puts in your ERP system behind the curtain and brings it back out, and then thinking that it's all going to work fine. They really want to see evidence that people participated in the weekly status meetings, that they made comments on that they captured issues, that those were resolved, all those good things that you would like to have. And then some level of evidence that there was actual sign-off on things like the requirements or the high-level design or the design specifications themselves, be it an email or something more formal. That's definitely something that's of interest to them. Then, of course, the solution itself, requirements, the configuration, any customizations via interfaces or forms or actual functional enhancements will definitely get more scrutiny than the, quote, standard configuration. And then data conversion, very important to the auditors, as Jeremy mentioned earlier, to be able to map from the fields from your legacy system into the new system. And if there was a conversion, what actually changed by design and documentation around that to prove it. Also want the confidence that we have a well-defined plan and a timeline as to actually how things are going to go, that go-live weekend events, and then the documentation around it that actually proves that things tie out. The security model itself, again, just the roles assigned to different users, making sure from a segregation of duties perspective that those are tested. To be honest, in the typical ERP implementation, it's not fully vetted the way it is, as I mentioned, after it's in the support phase, but the initial security model itself is tested in user acceptance testing, but it's more of a GRC or compliance-oriented project that really scrutinizes the segregation of duties, kind of typically after go-live. Then moving on, the formal documentation of business users having used the system and signed off on the functional requirements themselves. And from a technical standpoint, some reports, again, to satisfy the interest in, can you prove to me that you know everything that changed since the time the software was installed, every object in the case of AX, can you tell me when that was changed? And then they'll scrutinize on a few of them to be sure that the documentation aligns with it. Similarly, once the product is in production or moving from user acceptance into production, tracking change control, also very important, and justification from the business to do that. And then not SOX specific, but if you are a FDA compliant type company, in parallel, focused on the operational aspects of the software is the IQ, OQ, and PQ. So I threw that in there just for the context that sometimes these are happening at the same time, sometimes it's just SOX oriented, but this is the set of documentation that every auditor is going to want to see from you.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Tim, and highlighting all these documents that really are artifacts that are going to kick out of any well-run ERP project. Auditors are going to be very interested in just about every one of these. So the audit concerns, as I've highlighted already, the PCAOB is hyper-focused on this area. In reviewing some of the inspection reports, one of the firms, very large firm, was flagged as not having the appropriate scrutiny over go live, system migrations, etc. Very, very scathing report. So the concerns that we would be looking at as auditors, specifically IT auditors, first and foremost is what's the methodology? How did you go about a structured approach to the requirements definition, implementation, and then validation of that go live? We're always looking for ink on the paper. One of my clients very early in my career had a great saying or great question, which was, so I guess Scout's honor doesn't work anymore. I said, yeah, absolutely. I can't audit a phone call. I can't audit a discussion unless there's meeting minutes that come out of it. So documentation and approvals are key. The other piece that's getting very, very high degree of scrutiny now is not only do we have the approvals, but is it the right approval? Is it the right person? Do they have, and we call it the SKE, the skills, knowledge, and experience to be the one signing off on that? So, for example, if you have a CFO that is very sort of investor relations focused, very hands-off with the business, delegates a lot of that day-to-day responsibility down to the controller and the finance team and the COO and maybe the operations team, is that CFO really the one who should be signing off? Does he have the right skills, knowledge, and experience to be the proper individual saying, yes, we followed the proper methodology, we've hit all the proper review gates, we've had the appropriate individuals involved in the process. So there's a very, very high degree of scrutiny around that. Data migration ties right into completeness and accuracy. Did we have the proper mapping of fields from legacy to the new ERP? And do we have a one-to-one match? And if we don't, why do we not have that one-to-one match? What are those reconciling items? Do they appear to be appropriate? And do we have the right individual signing off on them? So with that, let's shift gears slightly to concern number 2, which is implementing an old process with the new system. And with that, let's start off with a hypothetical question, something for you to noodle on briefly here. Which is more important during an AX or really any implementation? Is it the process or is it technology? definitely a hypothetical question, but what I would challenge is the two are inextricably linked. You can't talk about process without talking about technology, and you can't talk about technology without talking about process. Now, the issue with old processes, simply looking at them in a vacuum, is they may not scale despite implementing new technology. And we see this quite a bit in implementations where they have a very accelerated timeline, where they're simply going to say, hey, we need to get this new software in because it allows us to have more users, more collaborative, more stable, but we just want to kind of take what we're doing and slam it into the new software. And we see that what it does there is not only does it not scale, but it's not accounting for future growth, and it may not properly align from a variety of perspectives, whether it be corporate growth, corporate initiatives, internal control concerns, whether it be SOX, FDIC, HIPAA, et cetera. And then last but not least, you're not going to leverage the efficiencies between these compliance efforts. If you look at the Venn diagrams of compliance-related activities, whether it be SOX, FDIC, for financial institutions, FDA, et cetera, there's a high degree of overlap that if you approach your process and your technology together, you can really leverage some economies of scale in evaluating those. So what does that solution look like? First you want to consider the process. And you want to, as I mentioned, look at it as though technology and process are inextricably linked. It's a great time in terms of your culture within your organization to ask questions like, what if? It's ripe for change. You guys have embraced the culture of change by saying, yes, we're going to move from a legacy system to a newer ERP. So ask those questions. If we were to start over, if we were to redesign this process, what would it look like? And leverage individuals who have deep process knowledge as part of your implementation or upgrade. And that can be individuals who have a more GRC or internal audit background that are process oriented and audit oriented. It can be individuals who are systems oriented, or in a perfect scenario, it's collaborating with multiple individuals who have a very wide variety of backgrounds that can provide a more holistic solution. And with that, the logical question then is, okay, well, where do we start?
Great. Yeah, so a couple things to consider here too is, when we start to think about business process design, we can all visualize, what that might look like. But even before we get into that, I guess what I would challenge is the efficiency and the duration of your ERP implementation is also going to be largely driven by these three components, and that is you really need some guidance going into those business process design sessions as a framework, or you're going to spin your wheels, right? And we've seen that because, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many things that need to happen that are all interrelated on a given ERP project, and everybody wants to move as fast as they can, and nobody wants to waste money. But it's really important that in the rush to try to be productive, that you know what you're doing, in essence. So this slide is really just a reminder to step back and say, hey, look, your corporate strategy is one of your primary inputs into this more detailed activity called an ERP implementation, and the internal controls around controlling your business objectives. So your higher level policies, your enterprise risk management, identified risks, your high level IT strategic plan are all the context that your ERP project should be operating in. It's not really the time to dream these up for the first time. You kind of want to know that going in. Similarly, obviously, there's U.S. laws, there's foreign laws, depending on where your company operates in. There's rules, regulations, standards. All those things you need to be mindful of, or your service provider also needs to be familiar with to give you good guidance. And then similarly, on the IT side, just good governance standards, be it COBIT or other, whatever is applicable to your company. All business providers like Armanino would like to think that we're following the best practices out there and think that we are, but we need to align those with whatever the key aspects are within your company. It's an assumption that there's a business continuity plan, operating out there that we need to be aligned with, or not going to do anything to upset. And then going back to just the methodology itself, right? There's all kinds of great quality principles and quality management systems out there. If you're using Dynamics AX, there's a whole host of resources and templates that the Microsoft SureStep methodology provides. And then we like to think at Armanino that we can bundle all that together for not only the software implementation, but then also go hand in hand with the GRC compliance aspects of every ERP project.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Tim, and it really ties into kind of one of the key points, which is leverage a proven methodology, whether you're using a waterfall or an agile methodology, et cetera. Look at a proven methodology and look at where methodologies between sort of the different stakeholder groups overlap, whether it be operations, internal audit, compliance, ERP implementation, et cetera, and look where those can you can gain some efficiencies. And it really ties back to kind of the cliche of measure twice, cut once. The better planning you can do on the front end, the better analysis you can do to determine where can we modify our processes, where can we gain some efficiencies, et cetera, the better off you're going to be once you actually move to the design and implementation components. Now, the other thing that you may want to consider is where you can align your documentation. Look for process inefficiencies. Visually mapping out your processes is something that's highly recommended, and at least from a SOX perspective, it's becoming a requirement. Not every Big Four has come out and said that they have to have them. Several of them have, based on PCAOB input. They have said that, look, without having a visual representation of the process, how do you know you did not miss anything? I tend to agree with that approach. I'm a little more of a visual learner, so that resonates with me more. I think the key point is what you can do is visualize your process far better and look for areas where data is moving manually, data is not being managed in the most efficient way. And the nice part is these types of visualizations of your processes you can really leverage across multiple efforts. These can be direct inputs to your ERP project for designing your process, for designing the way in which your system is going to work. They can very much be overlaid with your internal control requirements as well, as reflected on some of the annotations in the graphic to the right on the screen. You're going to leverage them around system configurations and documentation to UAT, and at the end of the day, it's ultimately something that's going to allow you to tackle multiple issues with a very concise set of documentation. All right, rounding the corner to concern number 3, and this is one of my favorites. Auditors don't speak AX. If you're to go out to Amazon.com and just search for auditing SAP or auditing Oracle, the results that come back in terms of books that are available are reflected here. If you also search for auditing AX, that is reflected here. And to me, I had a sense that there was far more thought leadership out there purely from an IT audit perspective as it related to these other systems. I was a little shocked to see that there was nothing out there from an AX perspective. You can see between 70 and 80 books that are very, very specific, provide very prescriptive guidelines on how to get into those systems respectively and audit them and identify where these issues are. I've worked with dozens of clients over the years that are both Oracle and SAP environments, and the Big Four have very sophisticated automated tools that will go in and interrogate these systems and produce automated reports. The challenge is none of that exists for AX because it's a relatively new player in this space, and if you look at all the industry reports, it's number one, a fantastic tool, which is why we are one of Microsoft's largest partners in this space, but number two, why it's taken a ton of market share from these other organizations. And the concern that it raises for an organization is the institutional knowledge that the auditing profession has around this system is just not there yet. Now, how do you get around that? The solution is you need to educate the auditors. You need to be the expert in this space. And really, in a nutshell, you need to think like an auditor. And I know that's a little alarming to some because, come on, who really wants to think like an auditor other than those people like me who are auditors? But you really need to start thinking of it from that way. You want to begin with adopting a control framework, and this is kind of the basic blocking and tackling of compliance. You want to start with that. You want to clearly and completely define your processes, because what you don't want to do is what we describe as you don't want someone to wander. You don't want an individual to come in not knowing explicitly what they're looking for and start to wander through your system. If you look at how some of these individuals will approach an Oracle audit that have done multiple Oracle audits, they will come in and sit down with the system administrator and be very explicit. Go to this screen, give me this screenshot, show me this configuration, etc. Well, if they don't know where those are in AX, they may wander. So you need to guide the discussion and point them to the highest risk areas. And then the last thing, and I always tell my clients this in any type of audit, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to ask why they have a specific request. Just because they're asking for it doesn't mean that A, they need it, or B, know why they're asking it. So don't be afraid to be in that driver's seat and really drive the discussion. And it doesn't mean that you have to say no in a very spiteful way. But healthy pushback is always a good thing when you look at it from an implementation perspective and from an audit perspective. So as I mentioned, what should you begin with? You need to begin with understanding, and understanding first and foremost that the auditors do not know the system anywhere close as well as you do. So you need to think like an auditor. As I mentioned, you really want to dig in and you want to drive your processes towards maturity. You want to relate risk to the process, and that's something where the clients that do this the best that I've worked with for a number of years, speak very much in a risk-oriented manner, where if they get a request from an auditor that they disagree with, they bring it back to risk. Help me understand what you are concerned with here. What is the risk? What could go wrong? And it's then incumbent on the auditor to say, here's why I'm concerned. We need to look at separation of duties, because if we don't, the concern is that we could have individuals who have inappropriate access that could be initiating unauthorized transactions or transactions that exceed their approval limits, etc. So pushing the ownership back on them to have a very thoughtful, risk-oriented way to approach this is very significant. And in doing this, recognize that the software really takes the back seat. It doesn't matter if, as I mentioned, if it's Oracle, if it's SAP, if it's GP or AX, you can really fill in the blank. If you apply this approach, the system that you are applying it to really kind of fades into the background, if you will. It is very process-oriented and very risk-oriented, which is really the right way to approach this. Another way to look at it is leverage the internal controls lifecycle, and really drive hard with your auditors to have them focus on where the ERP is supporting your business cycles. So if you look at the graphic on the left there, sort of the life cycle, and you cull out what is the business processes, you really want to drill down from sort of a master process to a sub-process to individual risks and controls. And if you leverage this well, you're going to help drive your auditors in the right discussion points, and you're going to help drive them to the riskiest areas of your organization, and also highlight where the controls are to mitigate those risks. Now, if you're to put the pieces together here, let's take an example. If you're to look at a business process, for example, hire to term, the sub-process may be payroll additions. You could be concerned about, do we have fictitious employees? The first three pieces here are very process-oriented. You're looking at how you go from a request all the way through completion of an individual joining the organization. The control is a very small component of that. It could be configuration related, it could be process related. You're going to look at access rights, periodic reconciliations of HR registers, configurations, things of that sort. So you can see here, if you were to looking at it from a holistic perspective, we've got 4 different components, the majority of which very much focus on process and very little on software. This is again used to reinforce the idea that we need to be very process and risk oriented as it relates to dealing with auditors, and be slightly less concerned with the software against which they're applying those. All right, so cruising right along here, we're hitting the home stretch here. And we're going to be talking about some of the native tools in AX that can support audits, and why on one hand they're really good, but they may not be quite enough if you're really looking to optimize your environment.
So thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, so the good news is I think that Dynamics AX does have some powerful tools, and I've listed some of them here. There's extensive automated controls that can be enabled. It protects the PII information, integrates with SharePoint for things like your document management related to standard operating procedures, or has an automated work instruction documentation tool that comes with the product, has a very robust security model, audit trail tracking. Armanino brings data conversion tools to any implementation, and as I mentioned before too, reporting tools on object changes and change control. All that's wonderful. The challenge is that it still begs for any ERP implementation someone that has the point of view to really understand what are the internal controls principles, what are the requirements for your company, what are familiarity with your business processes, to then configure these tools to meet your needs. And that's really still a challenge in itself, because as Jeremy mentioned earlier, it's not just the technology. So oftentimes, whereas I would argue that these are solid tools and good tools, there are more elegant ways to actually approach the whole internal controls area.
No, that's great. It's nice to see that, Tim. I've got you drinking the Kool-Aid. So. All right, there we go. So had a delay in the slide rolling forward here. So to Tim's point, while these native tools may be acceptable to sort of meet the least common denominator, one of the challenges that you run into is they are a reflection of data within the system, but it doesn't tie into the process component of that control and of the environment. So for example, if you're leveraging an audit trail report that could be used to facilitate a periodic review, one of the things we commonly look in the payable cycle is a review of vendor master file changes being done on a periodic review. So you could enable an audit trail report. You could even have a SQL Service reporting server, SSRS report, run against it. The challenges that come with that is it is purely a report. There is nothing else tied to it. So on one hand, you've got the data. On the other hand, you've got the action. What is being done against that? In the absence of a more sophisticated tool, you have to answer the questions of who's doing the review of the report, what's the frequency, what if they forget to do the review, how do they capture their review, etc. A lot of these things become manual, where you have to take the report, spit the report out in hard copy, sign off on it, document all the follow-up actions, etc. Then that draws into questions, concerns around completeness and accuracy, level of precision, management review controls, etc. Some of those things we highlighted earlier in the discussion. What I would challenge is there's some very good tools out there that will help you automate those solutions. And the thing to look at is really what is the core competency of that software provider. If you look at it, AX's core competency of what they're bringing to the table is enabling your business processes. Auditing is commonly an afterthought to a certain degree. They're looking at enabling your core business processes. How do we take in orders? How do we produce product? How do we make sure our payables and our receivables are being done timely and accurate, etc. What I would challenge is there's many organizations out there. We highlight one here, which is a company called FastPath. Their core competency and their core focus is enabling audit activities. So the screenshots that you see there on the right is what they call their GRC Studio. It's a collection of a variety of different tools, one of which is a separation of duties analysis tool. It comes preloaded with all of the conflicts. It will run against your AX security model and highlight where you have issues in your security model that would raise concern, where you have inappropriate combinations of security. So for example, if you have someone who can both set up vendors as well as cut checks, obviously it'd be a concern because now they can create fictitious vendors and cut those payments. Where I want to tie into the previous example is their audit trail and audit reporting capabilities. They have the similar capability to generate audit trail reports on a pre-scheduled basis. The concern around, hey, what happens if Tim forgets to do his weekly review? Well, that's somewhat mitigated because the tool will on a scheduled basis send out that report to the individual via email. It will place it on a SharePoint site. It will put it on a network drive and remind that individual to take action. The other functionality that tool extends is the ability for the person to document their review electronically. They can go into the tool, document what they reviewed, click on approve, and it captures an electronic signature based on their Active Directory credentials that shows when they executed the review, who did it, etc. Now that's great not only from an execution perspective because it takes some of the variables out of the equation, but from an auditor's perspective, it makes it so much easier to manage because I can get auditor access or an internal audit view to the GRC Studio and go run my own reports. I can do all of my testing in the absence of the client being there sitting in front of me. The other piece it does is I don't have to worry about if I'm working with Tim as my client, can I read his signature? Do I know who that person was that actually signed off on that? Because we're relying on electronic signatures, they're far easier to audit. So again, while you don't necessarily need to implement a third-party tool, I would challenge you that if you're looking to make compliance and you're looking to make internal controls be simply the output of the process and streamline your organization and streamline your compliance as much as possible, strongly recommend looking at third-party tools such as FastPath. All right, and bringing it home here, concern number 5, and this is one that's near and dear to my heart because I've counseled a lot of clients over the years to not look at it through this lens. Being a C student is not good enough. You know, I think about it now in my personal life. I've got 2 young children, and I think about if they came home one day and said, "Dad, I'm happy with a C." Can't really say that I'd be thrilled about them having that mentality. So, needless to say, it always concerns me when clients say that. So we start here with the famous last words of CEOs, CFOs, and CIOs, which is, "I don't want to be perfect. I just want to get a C and pass." I look at that and say that may be acceptable for the first year, but we really have to look at how we go beyond just being compliant. And the reason for that is just being compliant, just doing that bare minimum gives you no capability to react and to adapt if you have issues that were unforeseen. Big issue there. In 10 years of working in the GRC practice and now running the GRC practice here at Armanino, we've worked with over 200 clients, and in the course of business, we've only had one material weakness issued for a client, which I'll be honest, personally, I'm still bitter about, because if the client did not take this exact approach, we would not have been in that situation with them. They very much had the mentality of a C is fine, and they ran into some issues that they could not get out of, and it ultimately resulted in a significant material weakness. So great, you're saying, what does a C student look like versus what does an A student look like? We've highlighted here some of the attributes that you can view from sort of a grade perspective. If you're looking at an A company, I wouldn't necessarily say that you need to aspire to be an A organization unless you have significant concerns or significant compliance requirements beyond Sarbanes-Oxley. Got some organizations that have upwards of 7 regulations they're trying to comply with, whether it be ISO, HIPAA, FDIC, PCI, SOX, variety of areas they have to comply with. So you want to try to automate as much as possible if you're in that situation. I think being a B plus is probably the right place to be. That's where you have defined repeatable processes. You've integrated some automation. A big piece of it is you have tone at the top, which is really coming from the C-suites, coming from your CEO. And if you think about it, what message does it send to your employees if the CEO is saying, yeah, we just want to be average, we just want to be adequate, we just want to be a C player? I think of the CEOs that I've worked with over the years, and even the CFOs, they are exceptionally competitive individuals, and I guarantee you none of them want to be average in their industry. None of them want to be average in their careers. So looking at a very strong tone at the top is a very good indicator of what type of result they're going to drive. The other thing for a B company, and why I'd advocate most organizations should aspire to at least be in this category, maybe starting to move into some of the attributes of an A, is that processes that are not only defined, but they're measurable and repeatable. You can look at the occurrences of exceptions or issues and have some proactive management around those. You're going to have a very good sense of where the issues are going to creep up, as opposed to being surprised when the auditors come around and tell you where those issues are. The other thing to do is you want to make sure you don't go overboard. If you look at sort of the pinnacle of being an A student, you're going to look at companies like HP. There's been articles, there's been studies produced, et cetera, where it highlights their internal control environment for Sarbanes-Oxley has nearly no manual controls. And really the only ones that are in their control set that are manual are ones that relate to either the manual review of quarterly financials or annual financials. All of the day-to-day transactional controls, they're all automated. But if we're looking at organizations that Armanino works with, which are commonly mid-market organizations, somewhere between, say, 50 million and $1 billion in revenue, that type of mindset, that type of control set doesn't fit. So you want to make sure you don't go overboard. You want to start, as we've mentioned, by leveraging a framework, leverage a methodology, have a systematic way to go about evaluating your system of internal controls, and then implementing it, and then reevaluating it. That's the thing with Sarbanes-Oxley and a lot of these other control frameworks and control requirements is it's wash, rinse, repeat. It's not a one-time effort. It's something that if you're going to be a public company, you will be doing this for perpetuity. The other thing you want to do is make sure you start early, not only in your first year of doing this, but in subsequent years. I commonly see organizations waiting to start their annual planning process till June, July, August sometimes. We've commonly had significant changes in your organization earlier in the year you may need to account for, whether it be acquisitions, system implementations, employee churn, things of that sort. So you really want to make sure that you're starting early and adopt this mindset of continuous improvement. And it ties into what we talked about very early on, where what worked last year may not be the right message to send or the right way to approach it for this year. And it ties into culture. Culture and environment are more important than anything else. Everything else will follow if you build a culture of control and if you build a culture of continuous improvement. And I assure you the rest will follow from there.
Good stuff. Okay, so coming close to the end here, just thinking about tactically, next steps if you're pondering a new ERP implementation, what should you do, right? So I think the classic advice here is begin with the end in mind, right? As it relates to SOX, where are you on that continuum, right? Are you looking for just implementing good management practices? Are you looking to be ready to go live at the or ready for SOX at the end of your go live with your new implementation? Are you already SOX compliant and putting in a new system or upgrading your system, and you need to maintain that compliance, right? What level of documentation do you have today, and what level of documentation are you envisioning your users will have on the day they go live, right? Whether that's formal SOPs already, or if this project is kind of the first foray into that documentation and more of a SOX memo approach is more applicable. Whatever that's going to be, you want to just have those expectations clearly defined up front for your own benefit, and then also as part of the project itself and the scope of the project contract that you're putting together. Secondarily, with that in mind, in terms of any good ERP project, designating the process owners inclusive of internal controls, inclusive of compliance concerns, and the super users, as the phrase we like to use for Dynamics AX, in charge of each module. And then in turn, the areas of the module that relate to automated controls, just so someone is on point internally that is keeping that top of mind. And as I mentioned before, meeting with your auditor up front, always a good thing. Level set with them on expectations, and then incorporating that all into the project plan itself. All good advice.
All right, now as we near the top of the hour here, we're going to leave a few moments for question and answer here. I did want to kind of drive home with the last couple key points here, reiterate the key points that we discussed today. You need to define your business goals and assess risk. As I mentioned, really the key takeaway here is it's a continual process. It's not a one-time event. It's the wash, rinse, repeat type of mentality that you need to adopt. Working with complement implementers and working with one that really has a holistic approach to not only implementations, but the other impacts it may have on your organization, both operationally as well as compliance-oriented. Very, very smart to look at organizations that can bring multiple skill sets to the table to drive a more holistic and better benefit for you as an organization. UAT documentation, always painful to produce, always painful to audit. So anywhere that you can make that as streamlined as possible is always a good thing. Security, as we talked about multiple times today, very significant concern that's being raised not only by auditors but also by implementation teams, making sure that the sophistication that comes with a tool like AX is reflected in a security model that is equally sophisticated to not only meet the needs of your organization but also mitigate risk. At the end of the day, SOX is focused on reliability of financial reporting, but it also does dovetail into a lot of other operational processes that may be upstream that feed into the financials downstream. And then from there, IT operations always included in the process as well. And with that, we've got a handful of minutes left for some questions here, and thank you to those who did submit some questions. Let's go ahead and tackle a couple of these. First one is, what tools are out there to document processes, especially those that are visual? I'll speak to this maybe initially, and Tim, you can chime in. The one that I still see the most is Visio. It's sort of the de facto one that's out there. I have come across a couple of GRC tools. One's called BWise, the letter B as in boy, wise, which originally started off as a competitor of Visio and then migrated more the direction of GRC software, which is decent. I will say the thing to me that's intriguing about Visio is if you look at the functionality that comes along with pairing Visio with the most current release of SharePoint, you can make some pretty dynamic workflows where you can actually have some drill down capability into them. And while we haven't integrated those from a widespread perspective across our client base, it is something that's on our plan for 2014 because the power there is pretty significant for blending both visual and written documentation into a single source.
I would add to that, from a Dynamics AX perspective, Armanino has created its own business process reference model, all in Visio, happens to be in Visio, as well as the product documentation for AX and GP and Dynamics CRM is all documented in Visio as well, and there's literally hundreds of process flows at a very detailed level that come with the product that you can leverage and make your own.
Now, that's great. Well, let's see here. Another question. Who are the typical users of FastPath? Is it accounting, finance, IT, internal audit? The simple answer to that is yes, all of the above. Let me give a little more background on FastPath, and really we could do an entire webinar just on how you would enable your organization using those types of tools. But We mentioned the GRC Studio. GRC Studio is a container. There are 6 different applications that are functions that would reside within that application, and they're going to be used by different constituents. So finance and accounting, they would be reliant, are sort of the super users of the 2 products called Audit Trails and Audit View. Those are going to be the tools that help you generate your periodic reports, and then Audit View is that functionality that layers on top of it in terms of capturing notes and comments and details around what the review captured, what did the individual find in the review, what were the results, what were the follow-up actions, and then capturing that electronic signature. There is a single sign-on component that allows you to administer access to Dynamics, more so from a GP perspective, but allows you to administer Dynamics directly from Active Directory, so you do not need to have your IT administrators within that application. And then last but not least, you would have internal audit using the Assure model in combination with finance, the Assure module. And that is the separation of duties analysis tool that comes preloaded with all of the conflicts any auditor would be concerned with. That was developed by a team of certified internal auditors and certified public accountants looking at what are the various combinations of security across the Dynamics suite, whether it be NAV, SL, AX, or GP, that auditors would be concerned about. So it really depends on the different components of your organization, but it really is intended to be a very holistic tool that can support a lot of different needs throughout your organization.
Okay. I'll take one that's, are there internal controls available in AX version 2009 as well as version AX 2012? So good question. On 2000, okay, first of all, internal controls relative to AX, I'm thinking at it more broadly. There's what you may be asking for specifically here is on 2009, there were not any predefined security roles that came with AX version 2009. Whereas with version 2012, they added something like 70 predefined roles for really as a jump start for organizations to associate a user to one or more roles as a way to very quickly to define their security permissions. And again, AX being very flexible tool, that's both a wonderful and a challenging thing because you can literally modify a given user's access through roles, through duties, through access to different fields, at whatever level of detail you can. So given there's upwards of 2,000 menu items in AX, you can imagine the possibilities if you really wanted to or needed to change the access method. So those roles are a good jump start. Again, every client is a little different, so they all require some level of modification, some experience, or not some experience, but good experience with internal controls principles and what your segregation of duties should be for your client. So 2012 is definitely a jump start over 2009. Armanino does bring some predefined roles for 2009 for the record, but it's all about 2012 at this point, so right there.
All right, time for one more question. And this is a good one, and it's an interesting question. Is it better to do SOX readiness in parallel with an implementation or post go live? I'll ask Tim to give his thoughts on this initially, and then I'll chime in.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so this is one that we get a lot, and I think it would go back to sitting down up front and kind of understanding what are the expectations upon go live, because it is there are merits either way. But again, I think where I would typically come in on is involving GRC folks, compliance folks in the project, but then refining their actual final documentation once the solution is stable after we go live. Argument definitely could be made that, hey, from a purist perspective, shouldn't we be defining all the business processes up front? That's true, but also at the same time, we're trying to do a kind of a capability-driven design. A given software package like AX does certain things. You want to leverage what it does well. You want to be mindful of those features and functions while you're designing your process. So I think it goes hand in hand. But more often than not, it's typically afterwards. But
yeah,
what's your?
I would agree. In a perfect world, you're going to have a longer timeline for go live, so you can involve your GRC consultants earlier in the process. The reality is that rarely happens, and because of that, we're commonly brought in on the back end. I think you, to Tim's point, you just really need to look at what are the objectives and what is the most critical aspect, and involving not only your GRC solution experts internally, but also engaging your external auditor. The risk appetite of each external auditor is going to be slightly different. You could have some that are perfectly comfortable with you saying, hey, 3 months, within the first 3 months of us being live, we'll come back, revise our internal control set. They may be perfectly comfortable with that. Others may not. And it also is going to depend on the time of year. If you go live in mid Q2, less risky than going live in Q4 from a internal controls perspective. So the answer is there's not one solution or one answer that fits all, and it really has to be a collaborative effort between management, your implementation consultant, your GRC consultant, and your external auditor.
Great. I think that wraps up our Q&A session. So if your answer didn't get a response yet, we'll go ahead and send those out after the webinar. Or if you have another question that came up, just please go ahead and contact Tim or Jeremy directly. We have their information right there on the screen. And as you exit the webinar, we have a short survey, and we hope you can take that and let us know how we're doing. So thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have a great day.